Inter began the 2024-25 season as the reigning champions. And the Nerazzurri remained the team to beat, especially after Simone Inzaghi's men added ability and experience to a squad that had cantered to the Scudetto the previous season. While the champions had favoured continuity in their attempt to successfully defend their domestic crown, their rivals went a different route in the hope that a fresh start in the dugout could deliver an immediate return on the trophy front. Antonio Conte had built his reputation on getting results, and quickly. So he appeared a good fit as the new Napoli head coach after the Partenopei had lurched from the sublime 2022-23 Scudetto season to a ridiculous title defence that saw them finish 10th with 3 different coaches along the way. Milan had finished as runners-up to Inter, albeit Stefano Pioli had paid the price for losing too many derbies, including one that would eventually be worth a second star. Pioli had won the title in 2022 with veteran Zlatan Ibrahimovic as his elder statesman. And the former Sweden star was now embarking on a new chapter in his career as senior advisor to the Rossoneri ownership group. Ibra's first task was to appoint Pioli's successor, and he plumped for ex-Roma boss Paolo Fonseca. Juventus were also in the market for a new coach, after Massimiliano Allegri's second spell had only delivered a Coppa Italia trophy. The Bianconeri's football director, Cristiano Giuntoli, swooped for the hottest young property on the Italian scene, Thiago Motta, who had just improbably secured Champions League football for Bologna. Vincenzo Italiano left Florence to fill the vacancy at Bologna, and Raffaele Palladino was rewarded for his exploits at Monza with the Fiorentina job. Marco Baroni had also impressed with unfancied Verona, and he caught the eye of Lazio president Claudio Lotito, who named him as the new Biancocelesti boss. On the other side of the capital, Daniele De Rossi began his first full season at the Roma helm. While after winning a first piece of silverware, courtesy of the Europa League in Year 8 in Bergamo, could Giampiero Gasparini mount a title challenge in his 9th league campaign as Atalanta coach? The previous 2 league titles have been secured by huge winning margins, with Napoli and Inter ending their Scudetto seasons 16 and 19 points clear of their respective nearest challengers. But it soon became apparent that the 2024-25 season would buck the recent trend, when the previous 2 title winners were joined by Atalanta in a pulsating 3-horse title race. That had appeared unlikely after Napoli came away battered and bruised from Verona's Stadio Bentegodi on the opening weekend. Elsewhere, Atalanta not only lost in Turin in round 2...
It's saved! Milinkovic-Savic, heroics from the penalty spot.
But at San Siro the following week as well, as Simone Inzaghi's Inter hammered home their status as La Dea's Achilles heel.
Simone Inzaghi's Inter are already purring in the early portion of this season.
It never rains, but it pours, goes the old adage, and that rang true in Bergamo when torrential rain pushed back Como's trip to Gevis Stadium by 24 hours. And Cesc Fabregas celebrated his side's first top-flight win since their Serie A return.
Atalanta have forgotten how to defend, and Como are showing top-flight promise.
Atalanta were headed for a 4th defeat in 6 games to begin the season, until Samajic rescued a point at the Della. Napoli might have been beaten heavily on the opening weekend, but that reverse would merely galvanise the Partenopei.
A breathless occasion ends with a Napoli win,
as they took 25 points from a possible 27 in their subsequent 9 league matches. The 2 points they dropped were the result of a goalless draw in round 5 against a Juventus side that had yet to concede at that stage of the campaign.
Another clean sheet for Juventus, 5 from 5.
That meant Antonio Conte's side was 6 points clear of Atalanta, ahead of their meeting at the Maradona in matchday 11. But Lookman...
He scored twice to stun the league leaders.
And Retegui helped bring up a 5th consecutive victory for the visitors.
It wouldn't be a league match without a goal for Matteo Retegui.
Further north, champions Inter just couldn't keep their momentum. For every comfortable win, there was an average performance to go along with it.
Kenan Yildiz has single-handedly got them back on level terms.
But the Nerazzurri still went into their matchday 12 fixture at home to Napoli on the back of 5 wins from their previous 6, and trailing the league leaders by just a single point.
To say it is congested at the top of Serie A is an understatement, and then some.
Inter also trailed in that match, but would have the chance to win it from 12 yards, only for the penalty specialist to lose his bearings.
What had seemed one of the great certainties in Italian football, the myth has been busted.
Inter would return after the November international break in style, putting the game to bed in Verona before the interval. However, a medical emergency would see their game at Fiorentina abandoned after midfielder Edoardo Bove collapsed. The Roman would later recover in hospital in Florence and would spend the rest of the season serving on Raffaele Palladino's staff. Inter would therefore have a game in hand until that match was replayed at the Franchi in February. And they would win all of their remaining league matches in 2024 with some eye-catching displays along the way.
Barella!
Atalanta were on course to finish the year perfectly, only for their final opponents to end their winning run.
It is the first time that they've dropped points since late September.
11 victories on the bounce remained a club record sequence, though that same form would prove elusive in 2025. Napoli had beaten Roma and Torino by the slimmest of margins. But Antonio Conte's men came unstuck by that same 1-0 scoreline at home to Lazio in round 15. However, just like they had done earlier on in the season,
Napoli needed to answer their critics, and they have done so in some style.
the Partenopei harnessed a loss to go on a winning run, following up their reverse to the Biancocelesti with 7 consecutive victories either side of the turn of the year. The fixture list would be complicated by Inter's and Atalanta's involvement in the EA Sports FC Super Cup in Saudi Arabia. But after Atalanta were held by Juventus in matchday 19,
Retegui! He's back!
and Inter could only draw at home to Bologna,
After 6 straight league wins, Inter drop points again.
Napoli became winter champions as the team top at the halfway stage. An honorary title made official once Fiorentina beat Inter in their rearranged game.
The first win in nearly 8 years against Inter on this ground for Fiorentina. And what a victory it was. It ends here. Fiorentina 3, Inter 0.
Juventus, Milan and Roma are 3 of Italy's biggest clubs. And with that stature come big expectations. Thiago Motta, Paolo Fonseca and Daniele De Rossi began the season as Serie A coaches. But they would all lose their jobs at various points of the campaign. And to think, optimism had been abundant in the capital after De Rossi had impressed in a caretaker role the previous campaign. However, the former midfielder would only last until mid-September.
It is a historic day for Empoli. For the first time in their history, they have beaten Roma at the Olimpico.
As the Giallorossi failed to win any of their opening 4 league games. His successor, Ivan Juric, had been out of work since leaving Torino. And although the Croatian would win his first 2 matches,
Ivan Juric's first game in charge leads to Roma's first win of the season.
a sequence of 4 losses in 5, either side of a victory over his former club Torino, would see him dismissed in early November.
It is another damaging defeat for Ivan Juric in the Roma dugout.
By then, Milan's Paulo Fonseca had already come under pressure, barely surviving the autumn after collecting just 2 points from his opening 3 matches. Fonseca would eventually lose his job in late December, following a home draw against his former club.
That's Dovbyk, and this is Dybala! One of the goals of the season.
Roma were now onto their 3rd boss of the season in the shape of Claudio Ranieri.
Welcome back, Gaffer, reads the message in the Curva Sud.
The one real highlight for Fonseca had been September's league derby victory over Inter. A feat quickly emulated by the man who replaced him, Sergio Conceição, albeit in the Super Cup. The Rossoneri came from behind to beat Juventus. Inter.
There's Abraham to win the Super Cup. The mother of all turnarounds in Riyadh for Milan.
And Como in January 2025 across all competitions.
First Hernandez and now Rafa Leao, 2 players looking their old selves again since the arrival of Conceição.
But Milan was still way down in 8th place come the halfway point of the season, miles behind Napoli. Juventus were marginally better off than Milan at the same stage, even though Thiago Motta's side had kept clean sheets in their first 6 matches to start the campaign. The Bianconeri had been just 2 points off the pace after 12 games. But a run of 7 draws in their subsequent 8 matches all but snuffed out their title aspirations. Juventus didn't actually lose their first game until matchday 22, even though that trip to Naples had initially appeared promising.
Mike Fulcani for Colomwani! Fresh from signing for the club, he immediately leaves his mark. That's Onguissa! 1-1!
The Bianconeri lost from a winning position at the Maradona.
Conte's men have turned it around.
But then defeated Empoli despite initially trailing the following weekend.
Colomwani! A huge sigh of relief for Juventus. What a start to life in a Juve shirt for Randall Colomwani.
And a further Colomwani brace took his tally to 5 goals in his first 3 Serie A games. The victories over Empoli and Como were the first 2 matches in a 5-game winning streak.
Colomwani wreaking havoc, and Chico Conceição has poked it into the corner.
Taking Juventus at one stage to within 6 points of the Serie A summit after 27 rounds. But it soon became clear that Colomwani couldn't sustain his goal-scoring form, and nor could the Bianconeri build on their momentum. In the end, 2 embarrassing defeats.
Colasina, Zappacosta! That is La Dea at their scintillating best. And they are absolutely destroying Juventus on their own patch. This is the humbling to end all humblings for the Bianconeri.
Would see Thiago Motta dismissed during the March international break.
2 bruising defeats in as many weeks. All talk of the title has been banished for Juventus.
After the break, the title race would go down to the wire. Atalanta had drawn their final game of 2024, which ended a run of 11 consecutive victories. And Della weren't able to rediscover their best form following the turn of the year. In fact, Gasparini's side wouldn't win 2 matches in a row in Serie A.
Riteki! Atalanta finally back amongst the goals.
Until mid-April, between rounds 32 and 33.
Ederson! And the first time Della have really been able to play their brand of football.
Despite that, the men from Bergamo had remained in the title race, right up until a loss to their bête noire Inter heading into the March international break. That defeat to Inter was the first of 3 without scoring.
That does it. Inter confirmed their status as Atalanta's bogey team.
As Atalanta were also beaten by Fiorentina.
Fiorentina pick up another big scalp at Fortress Franchi.
And Lazio to fall 10 points behind the league leaders.
Isaacson puts it away. Basic defending from Atalanta has allowed the Biancocelesti to score.
With 7 matches remaining. When Atalanta had begun to falter in January, Napoli initially hit their stride. And the Partenopei's statement win in Bergamo in round 21.
McTominay! What a comeback this from Napoli!
Was their 6th victory on the spin. And they overturned a deficit at home to Juventus the following weekend too.
It's a 7th win on the spin for Antonio Conte's winning machine. They show the mark of champions.
So, many were tipping Antonio Conte to add another Scudetto to his CV. Yet, as is so often the case, one minor setback can easily halt all of your momentum.
Deep into added time! Angelino brings Roma level!
As Angelino's late equaliser for Roma would end a 7-match winning streak and herald a 5-game sequence without maximum points.
This is a Kellen Camp. What an equaliser!
When clean sheets dried up and opponents became emboldened.
Boulaïtia! Another late goal on this ground against Napoli.
The only loss in that stretch came at the Senigallia.
That's a mistake from Rahmani.
When Coma's dazzling wonder kids grabbed the spotlight.
Lico pass. This is Assad Diao. His star continues to rise.
That left Napoli 1 behind Inter. A gap that was set to move to 4 points.
Di Marco has delivered the most delicious free kick.
Once Federico Di Marco had done his best Maradona impression in Fuorigrotta. Only for Conte to land upon an unexpected saviour.
Here's Billing, and there he is again! The unlikely hero, Philip Billing.
And while Inter would put that disappointment behind them with 3 straight wins, doubts persisted about the Nerazzurri back line.
Monza have done the unthinkable and doubled their lead here.
Monza gave them an almighty fright.
A diving header and Turati off the line. Did it cross the line? From 2-0 down to 3-2 up. A huge blow to their title rivals.
Before Parma turned around a 2-0 deficit at the Tardini.
This is on Draker. Still on Draker, it's deflected, and Parma are level. They've scored twice in the second half, and Inter have thrown away a lead.
Inter's draw at Parma gave Napoli the chance to cut the deficit at the top from 3 points down to 1, provided they could win at Bologna.
Zamboghi will score the opening goal.
They seem to be well on their way to becoming the first away team to win at the della in 2025, until some home joy courtesy of Dan and Doy.
And what an effort that is! What a finish it is from Dan and Doy!
The della would then play host to Inter in matchday 33, and the Nerazzurri had traumatic memories of that venue from a similarly tight title race with Milan 3 seasons earlier. A goalless draw would have been damaging, if not disastrous. But in added time, Juan Miranda threw a spanner in the works.
Bisek has flicked it to Orsolini! Bologna have won it! Deep into added time! It is a goal which is massive for Napoli, watching further south.
That left Napoli level on points after their win at Monza 24 hours earlier, when McTominay had stepped into the breach.
Napoli get away scot-free at Upower Stadium.
So, with 5 matches to play, Inter and Napoli sat neck and neck to raise the prospect of a championship playoff to settle the Scudetto. But where once they had been 3 ahead, Inter would dramatically fall 3 behind Napoli.
And here's Sole. It's Roma who lead at the Meazza. What a blow this is for Inter.
After Roma conquered San Siro, and McTominay came to the fore once more.
The fire starter has ignited the Maradona atmosphere once again.
Napoli won at Lecce to briefly extend their lead at the top to 6 points in matchday 35.
And here goes Raspadori! The man for all seasons! An iconic goal en route to the title in 2023. Has he bagged another one to put Napoli to within touching distance of the Scudetto?
Only for Inter to hit back with a victory of their own against Verona.
Aslani scores.
Despite the Nerazzurri playing a weakened team in the midst of their 2-legged Champions League semi-final against Barcelona. That meant that with 3 games to play, Antonio Conte knew that 7 points would suffice for Napoli to become champions. In short, 2 wins and a draw for the Partenopei would make it impossible for Inter to catch them. But the draw came sooner than expected, as Genoa swooped in and pinched a point in Fuorigrotta.
This is Raspadori! Conte's trump card once again. It's always Jack. Martin with the cross. Vasquez is forward! And he has scored an outrageous goal. 6 minutes from time, Johan Vasquez equalises for Genoa.
That came after Inter had temporarily moved level on points with Napoli earlier in the day via victory at Torino.
Here is Zalewski! His first for the club is an absolute peach.
Heading into the penultimate weekend of the season, Napoli knew the fate of the title race was still in their hands, provided they could win their 2 remaining matches. A trip to the Tardini appeared tricky, with Parma battling relegation. And so it proved, as the frame of the goal consistently thwarted Napoli. A late penalty was scrubbed from the record.
David Ned is fouled in added time. And the decision is overturned. It's a foul on the Parma player.
That left the 3,500 Neapolitans in Parma praying for good news from San Siro. Inter's opponents, Lazio, were motivated by the prospect of Champions League football.
Jan Bisek gives Inter the breakthrough, and they're currently going top.
The Biancocelesti cancelled out Bisek's opener for the Nerazzurri with a goal from a veteran.
Pedro!
However, that reprieve was short-lived for Napoli, when Denzel again showed he was Inter's man on fire.
Dumfries! Inter retake the lead! What a season he's having!
So Inter were just minutes away from seizing the Serie A summit, heading into the final round of the season. But just as Napoli had twice squandered a lead at home to Genoa in round 36, so Inter again spurned their advantage against Lazio in matchday 37, when Pedro deposited his penalty.
Lazio are level in the 90th minute, and with this, there's another twist in the title race.
So, ahead of the final round of games, Napoli knew they simply had to match Inter's result at Como to stay ahead of the Nerazzurri and become Italian champions for the 4th time. All Simone Inzaghi's men could do was win and hope for a favour from Cagliari. Inter held up their end of the bargain.
De Vrij there! 20 minutes gone. Inter leads. And with Napoli still drawing against Cagliari, this sees Inter, as things stand, top of the pack.
With the Nerazzurri leading and half-time looming at the Maradona, the player of the season scored a priceless goal.
Politano delivers. McTominay! Napoli's most valuable player. And if he is to be the MVP, then Scott McTominay has scored the most significant goal of the season.
And after winning the Scudetto under Conte at Inter in 2021, Romelu Lukaku rolled back the years with a goal worthy of his prime.
What a run this is from Romelu Lukaku! That was vintage Lukaku, and he recaptures his best form on the biggest night of the season.
That second goal gave Napoli the cushion they were looking for to begin the party long before the full-time whistle. And a campaign of toil culminated in triumph.
Napoli are champions again. The season began with the slogan, Amma fatica, let's get grafting. It finishes with Amma vincut, we've won.
Atalanta fans would end the season with mixed feelings, given that La Dea ultimately finished just 8 points behind the champions. On the one hand, there would be regret that Atalanta faded in the title race, having been a contender right up until March. On the other, La Dea again outperformed many of their big spending rivals to seal another comfortable and, above all, financially sustainable Champions League qualification. It was a very different story for Juventus. The Bianconeri had invested heavily in the transfer market, but the bulk of their high-profile signings failed to deliver value for money. Turncoat Mainers had been recruited on the back of his 15 league goals for Atalanta a season earlier. However, the Dutchman found the net just 4 times for Juventus in Serie A. Nico Gonzalez was also underwhelming. The former Fiorentina man produced just 3 league goals, and 2 of those came against the bottom side, Monza. Meanwhile, Douglas Luiz started just 3 matches in Serie A all season. And that helped to explain why the Bianconeri, now under caretaker coach Igor Tudor, was sweating over a top 4 finish deep into the final month of the season. Roma had seemingly given themselves too much to do after an autumn littered with defeats.
The Roma supporters are livid. It's a 4th straight loss in Serie A.
That left the Giallorossi just 2 points above the relegation zone and 15 off the Champions League places. Claudio Ranieri began his 3rd spell in charge with 2 straight losses, and while his Roma side would defeat Lecce in matchday 15, they lost at Como a week later.
Nico pass! An evening to savour for Como.
So with 8 defeats in their first 16 matches, few expected what would come next. As Ranieri inspired the Giallorossi to the most astonishing surge up the league table. Roma put 5 past Parma without reply just before Christmas, before beginning 2025 with a convincing win in the derby against Lazio.
It is Lorenzo Pellegrini with his first goal of the Serie A season in the biggest game of the lot.
The real highlight, however, was a 7-game winning run, during which time Miles Villa conceded just once, and 5 of those victories were by a 1-0 scoreline. Their unbeaten sequence would finally end at 19 matches.
Sulle! His first for Atalanta may just have secured Atalanta Champions League football next season.
Following defeat in Bergamo.
And Roma, after 19 games unbeaten, taste defeat for the first time in 2025.
But victory over Milan in Ranieri's final home match in charge kept them in the hunt for the Champions League ahead of the final weekend. A few months earlier, the Rossoneri had found themselves in a quandary, and so too did Bologna and Lazio. With 3 of the Champions League places essentially sewn up, there was just 1 spot left at Europe's top table, with as many as half a dozen teams vying for 4th place. Bologna, Milan and Lazio, though, had a quicker route to Europe, provided they could claim silverware. If the Biancocelesti could emulate Atalanta by winning the Europa League, they could secure a Champions League berth. And the signs were good when Marco Baroni led them to 1st place in the brand new 36-team league phase. However, Lazio would freeze on their big night in the Arctic Circle, crashing out to Norwegian side Bodo Glimt in the quarter-finals. Meanwhile, Milan faced Bologna in the Coppa Italia final. And although 22 years had gone by since the Rossoneri's previous success in the domestic cup, Bologna hadn't lifted it in more than half a century. To add further spice to the occasion, a Europa League place awaited the winners. And Dan Ndoye's solitary goal
Dan Ndoye makes the breakthrough early on in the second half.
Meant that place, along with the gleaming trophy, went the way of Vincenzo Italiano and Bologna. Fiorentina would again suffer heartache in the Conference League, a competition they had finished as runners-up in the previous 2 seasons. The Viola bowed out in the last 4. Moise Kean's goal-laden season did, however, keep them in the hunt for European football via the league.
What a season it's been for Moise Kean.
Heading into the final weekend. On matchday 38, 3 European places were still to be determined. 4th position would mean Champions League football, while 5th secured a Europa League place. The team finishing 6th would go into the Conference League. Juventus only enjoyed a 1-point lead over Roma, and it was the Giallorossi who were heading for the Champions League, after Venezia scored early against the Bianconeri.
Villa! It's the dream start for Venezia!
And Roma made the breakthrough at Torino.
And with Venezia currently doing them a big favour, they are on course to qualify for the Champions League.
Roma would ultimately be just 17 minutes away from finishing in 4th, until Juventus captain Manuel Locatelli hauled them over the line from the spot. With the Bianconeri and Roma both winning their respective matches, Lazio could finish no higher than 6th. However, they managed to slip down to 7th as Fiorentina matched the Biancocelesti's points tally and boasted a better head-to-head record, having beaten the Romans home and away. That meant that Fiorentina would play in the Conference League for the 4th straight season. Roma had coach Claudio Ranieri to thank for returning them to the Europa League, while Juventus secured Champions League football, the minimum target for the Bianconeri at the start of the season. After the break, 3 teams would lose their top-flight status in a memorable relegation battle. Salernitana had ended a 3-year stay in Serie A the previous season, and year 3 proved similarly painful for Monza. On the face of it, the Brianzoli's relegation back to Serie B appeared a shock for a team that had finished 11th and 12th in their first 2 top-flight seasons. But the club never recovered after the departure of their charismatic coach, Raffaele Palladino, to Fiorentina. Alessandro Nesta had enjoyed a glittering playing career with the likes of Lazio and Milan. However, despite an encouraging spell in the second tier with Reggiana, he struggled at the Monza helm. The Brianzoli would only win once in the first half of the season, on matchday 8 at Verona. And by the time their second victory arrived in round 20, ironically against Palladino's Fiorentina, Nesta had temporarily made way for Salvatore Bocchetti. That win for Bocchetti came in his 3rd game in charge, but 4 defeats followed, culminating in a 5-1 loss at Lazio.
Pedro strokes home his 2nd of the afternoon, Lazio's 4th.
Which prompted Monza to pivot on their coaching change.
Monza have reappointed Sandro Nesta in their bid to reignite their survival hopes.
The bottom club collected just 2 points from a possible 45, the other side of their win over Fiorentina, raising the prospect of them finishing with even fewer points than Salernitana's record 17 a year earlier. However, once relegation was mathematically confirmed at home to Atalanta,
Monza's 3-year stay in Serie A is over.
Monza began to play with freedom, and victory in Udine on matchday 36
Balde fires Monza to just their 3rd win of the season.
spared them from finishing a season to forget amid infamy. While Monza had been cut adrift in the battle to beat the drop, the other 2 places in the bottom 3 frequently changed hands. And there were 2 distinct approaches employed to try and avoid relegation. Some clubs like Empoli and newly promoted Venezia kept faith with their head coaches, trusting in continuity to help them to safety. Others went the drastic route, as Luca Gotti at Lecce, Alberto Gilardino at Genoa, and Parma's Fabio Pecchia were all dismissed, with the spectre of Serie B looming large. History would commend a decision taken by the Grifone hierarchy, as Patrick Vieira set about transforming Genoa's form at Marassi.
Another positive result for Genoa as they brush aside Parma and help themselves to a first home league win of the season. What a job Patrick Vieira is doing in Liguria.
And Christian Kivu's coaching credentials caught the eye too, thanks to some stunning results at home to the big boys.
Free header put away by Pellegrino.
Empoli's loyalty to Roberto D'Aversa owed plenty to their run to the Coppa Italia semi-finals, as it was hard to make the case for him to keep his job on the basis of the Tuscans' league form alone. Empoli's win at Verona on matchday 15 came in early December.
Colombo with a follow-up! What a strike, what a goal!
And they wouldn't claim maximum points in Serie A again until the 10th of May, some 21 matches later.
Fabulous strike from Tino Angerin, and Empoli's survival hopes have been reignited.
Similarly, Lecce went on a lengthy winless run of their own. Marco Giampaolo had replaced Luca Gotti in time for the trip to Venice in round 13. And Lecce won at the Pencil, the first of 4 victories in Giampaolo's opening 11 matches. However, the Salientini scored just 7 goals in their next 13 games, taking only 5 points from a possible 39 to leave them in deep trouble. Cagliari would flirt with the bottom 3, but never really got sucked into the relegation battle, mathematically sealing their survival in style on the penultimate weekend at home to Venezia. That game featured a milestone strike for Roberto Piccoli.
Piccoli hits double figures for the season.
And one of the goals of the season from the man wearing the armband.
Gaetano. Champagne stuff here from the Rosso Blu. Oh, that's delightful. They all are. That is a beautiful goal.
That defeat for Venezia was hard to take, as it came on the back of their win over Fiorentina, which had sparked optimism that they could improbably escape. The issue for the Lagunari was that their rivals had begun to emerge from their slump. From no wins in 5 months to 2 victories in the space of 8 days, Empoli found form in the nick of time. And the second of those wins came on matchday 37 and coincided with Lecce beating Torino.
What a goal from Ilba Ramadani!
Verona's draw against Como on the penultimate weekend was an excellent result in isolation, given that Cesc Fabregas's side had won 6 in a row prior to that. But it still left the Giallo Blues sweating in round 38. Despite sitting 3 points and 3 places above the drop zone, Verona weren't safe as they travelled to Empoli, who were 3 points behind them and with a superior head-to-head record. Nor were Parma assured of their place in Serie A for the 2025-26 season either, ahead of an awkward trip to Bergamo to meet third-placed Atalanta on the final weekend. But the onus was on Lecce to get a result at Lazio. Meanwhile, Venezia had it all to do on the final weekend, beginning 2 points from safety as they hosted a Juventus side needing victory to confirm Champions League football. There were countless permutations ahead of the final weekend, but some clubs were better placed than others. Venezia had to win their match and hope for help from elsewhere to overhaul Empoli and Lecce. The Tuscans and the Salientini knew that there was the potential for a relegation playoff if they matched one another's results, and Venezia failed to win. Draws, meanwhile, for Parma and Verona would essentially keep them in the division. Despite a spirited performance, Venezia lost at home to Juventus, which sent them down to Serie B with Monza. Parma were left to sweat when they trailed 2-0 at Atalanta.
And how about that? 2 goals in 2 minutes!
Especially when news broke that Lecce had taken a stunning lead at Lazio.
Koulibaly! What a gigantic goal at the foot of Serie A!
But the Ducali scored 3 goals without reply to secure a famous win in Bergamo.
Ondrejka! Parma complete the turnaround in the second half.
and stayed up in style. Lecce would go down to 10 men, but improbably held on for the entire second half to claim victory at the Olimpico. That meant that Empoli would need to beat Verona at the Castellani to force a playoff against the Giallo-Blu, due to their results in the three-team mini-league with Lecce and Empoli. However, that eventuality looked unlikely once Serdar gave Verona an early lead. And despite the best efforts of Jacopo Fazzini, his goal would prove to be in vain, as Domagoj Bradaric's second-half winner relegated Empoli.
Verona win at Empoli on the final day. Roberto D'Aversa's Tuscans are relegated after 4 consecutive seasons in Serie A.
Several newcomers impressed in their first season in Serie A, from individuals to teams. German coach Costa Runjaic inherited an Udinese side that had barely avoided relegation on the final day the previous year. Yet he harnessed the goals of Lorenzo Lucca,
better pressure from Udinese. This is Lucca! Finds the bottom corner underneath the body of David De Gea
to steer the Friulani to a comfortable 12th place finish. Torino were also under new management, as Paolo Vanoli was tasked with building on the foundations laid by his predecessor Ivan Juric. The Granata had a disappointing final month of the season, but they still came 11th, as Vanja Milinkovic-Savic once again starred between the sticks, and captain Samuele Ricci enhanced his reputation further forward with the help of mercurial January signing Elif Elmas.
That is fabulous!
However, both Udinese and Torino ended up below Como, a side promoted from the second tier. The Lariani's deep pockets didn't produce an immediate return on investment, but once Cesc Fabregas inspired his team to 6 consecutive wins between April and May, Como cruised into the top half of the table. Their superb season owed plenty to an injection of goals from Spanish teenager Hassan Diao mid-season. However, their real standout performer was Argentina midfielder Nico Paz, who went home with the Serie A award for the best under-23 player, thanks to a campaign featuring 6 goals and 8 assists.
In off the post, stunning strike.
The goalkeeper of the year gong went the way of Miles Vila, after he caught the eye with some world-class reflexes and a total of 16 clean sheets, playing an instrumental role in Roma's revival in the spring. Further forward, Inter's Alessandro Bastoni was no stranger to individual accolades, and after landing Defender of the Year in Inter's 2023-24 Scudetto winning season, the Italy international claimed the prize again as the backbone of the team that ended as runners-up. Milan had made more negative headlines than positive ones, but one player thrived amid the mediocrity. Having found the net just 3 times in his debut Serie A campaign, the Rossoneri's Tijani Reinders scored 10 goals this term.
It's Reinders!
To deservedly be named as the league's best midfielder and draw admiring glances from some of Europe's top clubs. One quick look at the goal scorers charts was enough to tell you who would win the best forward in the Italian top flight. Matteo Retegui took his game to another level following his switch from Genoa to Atalanta. The Azzurri striker smashed home 25 goals, 6 more than his nearest challenger, Moise Kean.
Retegui! The capocannoniere is back all right!
To be crowned capocannoniere as well as striker of the year. As for the overall MVP, once more it was a new face to the league, winning the prize with Napoli. 2022-23 had been the breakout year for the Partenopei's Kvicha Kvaratskhelia. However, with the Georgian leaving to join Paris Saint-Germain in January, it was Scott McTominay who became the latest icon in Naples. The numbers alone don't do justice to the Scotsman's influence. He struck 12 goals from midfield.
Politano standing it up. McTominay's there again!
But more than anything, he consistently delivered the game's opening goal and produced so many key moments under pressure down the stretch.
McTominay!
Finally, the man who pushed for McTominay's signature in the first place, Antonio Conte, was honoured as the best coach in Serie A. Conte won his 5th Scudetto in the dugout after 3 domestic crowns with Juventus and 1 with Inter earlier on in his career. His ability to change shape and personnel amid injuries and suspensions was ultimately what swung the title race Napoli's way. We leave you with some of the best goals from the 2024-25 Serie A season. Thanks for watching. See you in August.